Welcome back with a smiling face. Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. Fractured Vows. Episode 2. Chapter 11. I walked down the stairs and noticed my uncle shaking Sophia's hand. As I reach the bottom step, he turns around and faces me. "Lena," he says. I smirked. "You know you could have explained this on the phone and never had to leave your pack," I said to him. Uncle Keith looks at me with a pretend shocked face. "You swear you never want me here," he says. His shocked expression changes into a smile, and he holds out his arms to me. I couldn't help but walk over and hug the big buffoon. He has been there for me through everything. He also knows more about what happened with the school here, after he followed me to school to see how I was coping. He witnessed his only niece get bullied. Let's just say it didn't go down too well for the kids who did the bullying. I pulled back and looked up at him. He looks down at me. "Sweetheart, we had no choice in not telling you about Eli being your mate," he says. I nod. "I know and understand, but how did you know about it?" I asked him as I walked over to the couch and sat next to my father. My father smiles at me and places his hand in mine. I looked at my uncle, who had taken the chair opposite me, while Logan and Sophia took the two-seater sofa on the other side. My uncle looks at me and sighs. "Well, I was here on my annual visit to see your dad. I didn't know what was happening until Alpha Frank asked me to join him in the office. When I got there, Eli was there with him. Eli explained that he was your mate and that Blaze found it hard to be around you. I offered to take you to my pack and for you to live with me." I looked at him, his eyes were searching my face. "I wanted to tell you about all of this, but I knew it wasn't my place to tell you," he says. "I know you were suffering, especially after the confrontation with Eli." I sigh. "I don't blame any of you," I said, looking at them. "I know you had to keep it from me, and it was for my own good." They all looked relieved by what I said. I leaned back onto the couch. "I need to train," I said, trying to change the subject. "We train every morning," says Sophia. I looked at her and smiled. I glanced at my uncle, who was staring at me. He knew why I asked for training. "I'm going to make a cup of tea," says my father. He gets up from the couch after gently squeezing my hand. He lets go and walks into the kitchen. I glanced at Logan. He had a blank expression on his face. He must have been mind-linking someone. "I'm going to go outside for some air," I said. I got up and moved toward the front door. I opened it and closed the door after me. I stood outside and closed my eyes. I let the freshness of the breeze take over me as I take in deep breaths. I opened my eyes, and they instantly opened on the swinging chair seat. I couldn't help but smile whenever I felt down or needed space. The swinging chair was my place to go. I walked over and sat down. I couldn't help but stare out at the flower bed, and I needed to plant some more flowers. Maybe add new ones in. "You okay?" asks Bex as she comes closer. I know she heard everything that Uncle Keith told us. "Yeah," I say to her. She stares at me. "You think we could go for a run later?" she asks. I smile. "Yeah, sure we can," I said. I leaned forward and looked at the flower bed. "Bex, do you think we could be happy with Elias?" I asked her. Bex looks at me and smiles. "I think we can, but I'm letting you decide that one out," she says as a slow smirk forms on her face. "I will only take over if you make it harder for us." I smirked. "I know you will, and I also know you liked hearing about Blaze," I said to her. Bex grinned. Too right, if I remember rightly, he was a huge wolf, she says. I looked back at her, stunned. How do you remember him? I asked her. But something clicks, and I can't help but groan. Really, I said to her. Bex burst out laughing. Only you would think it would be time we caught him outside the forest clearing before he shifted into his human. I groaned. Well, it was the only time we saw his wolf, I said to her. Bex smiled. Oh yes, it was, but I know full well he has a big CK, like his human is huge too. I groaned out and leaned back onto the swinging chair. Wolf, now I can't get the image of Elias shifting and standing in front of me. Bex laughs, but she stops when I speak again. I don't want to remember that day Elias brought that girl from school back with him, and they were in the spare room. Bex glares at me. I remember, especially what happened after, even though you blocked me, she says. I stare back at her. I remember it well. The girl in question walks out of the spare room. She was one of the most popular girls. I was downstairs in the kitchen, and I could hear everything that was going on in the room as it was right next door to mine. Why did we have paper-thin walls? The girl was about to leave but must have noticed I was there. She went into the kitchen and demanded a drink. I was never one to please anyone, but let's just say she wasn't too happy when I told her no. I never saw it coming. She gripped me by my hair and slammed my face into the kitchen counter, hard. I remember her breath on my cheek as she pushed my face down onto the counter, telling me I was worthless and only good for one thing, and that was for letting her be here with Eli. She pulled me up and punched me in the face. She walked away as I slumped down to the ground. I placed a block on Bex all that time as I didn't want her to come out to defend me. I could hear growling in my head, which brought me back from my thoughts. I looked back at her. I would have killed her, she said, snarling. I sighed. I know you would have, but I had it worse than anything, I said. Bex stopped snarling and looked at me. She sighs. I wish I could give you a hug, she says as she lays back down in my head. I nodded. Me too, Bex, I said to her. I look at the flower bed, but my mind wanders to the whole incident with the girl. I didn't see anyone that day as I stayed in my room, as I had a bruise on my face. I made out that I was ill. I also vowed to never stay in the house when Elias was there. That night was the first and last time he did it. My father never knew about it, but Logan did. As I stated before, no one knows what happened to me during school. They would if they ever bothered to read my diaries. Logan told Elias that I had a crush on him as he read one of my diaries, but I know he read the one I left out for my father and him to read. The decoy one, not the actual one. Penny for your thoughts, says a voice, as it draws me out of my mind as I turn to look at them. Uncle Keith. I smiled at him. You okay? He asks as he joins me on the swinging chair. I looked ahead, not looking at him. I don't know, I said to him. I understand everything everyone has told me, and I believe that part, but Elias never saw me as a human, just a little girl who was his best friend's sister. I looked over at him. You know more about what happened here than anyone, as I told you when you made me open up to you, I said. I glanced at the house. I don't want people to feel sorry for me because I was picked on or because I was different, I said as I looked back at him. I worked my ass off in your pack to be the best I could be, and I did it all on my own and with you and Bex by my side. Uncle Keith nods. You have grown up more over the last 6 years, and I know there was more that you didn't tell me, but I was happy that you told me what you did even though I would love to see those people do it now to you, he says with a smirk. I looked at him, and I could see the smirk on Bex's face. I sighed. I noticed the look when I mentioned training. I said to him. I won't hurt anyone. I just need to keep it up as it helps me concentrate more, and besides, I want to be prepared for anything. Uncle Keith looks at me but doesn't say anything for a while, but he turns to look at the flower bed. I trained you because I knew you would be a Luna, and I wanted you to be able to fight, he says, and looks back at me. I wanted you to know how to look after yourself and also others. I smile. Thank you for showing me how, I said. He nods and smiles. You know, we had best go in before your father thinks we are planning your escape back to my pack, he says. I looked at him, confused. Why would he think I would be going back? I asked. Uncle Keith looked at me. Well, considering you punched Eli in the face and haven't exactly spoken about your plans, he thinks that he might lose you, he said. A smirk formed on his face. So you punched the alpha, he said. I smirked and nodded at him. Uncle Keith laughs. I would have loved to see that, he says. Well, if he keeps making the comments he told me earlier, he probably will have a few more, I said. Uncle Keith smirks. Logan told me something about breaking your fingernail, he says. I nod. What an ass, he says. I couldn't help the slight laugh. I know, I said. I got up off the swinging chair and stood in front of my uncle. He gets up and stands at the side of me. I think if you do train, don't show your true hand. Leave it for when you need to, he says as we walk toward the house. I nodded. I know, I said to him. I can do more damage if I want to. All the training I have had over the last 6 years has made me stronger. I want to make you proud, I said to him, making him stop in his tracks. Uncle Keith looks at me. I've been proud of you since day one, he says as he pulls me to his side. He looked at the door. I think I will stay a while longer. I need to make sure your father is all right, he said. I look up at him, and I have to admit, I hate being short. He seemed okay, but now, he seems fragile since this has come to light, I said. Uncle Keith nods. I agree. I think I will take him out, and with your permission, I want him to show him the videos of your fights, he says. I looked at him for a moment. I know my father would have a heart attack if he ever witnessed the fighting I do, but I think he has the right to know. I nod my head. Okay, but show him a mild one, I tell him, but he smirks. You never did mild. Bex smirks. Too right, we always went full pelt at the person and then wondered why we were slow at healing. I couldn't help but agree with her. I began fighting to get rid of frustration. All I had to think about was a memory of my past, and away I went. Fighting in street fights was my specialty, but I also go in a cage. No one would think I could beat them due to my size, but that was the irony. No one would suspect that I would hurt them. Uncle Keith moves and opens the front door as I pull myself from my thoughts. I needed to go in and spend some time with my family. I looked around the lounge. Logan and Sophia headed toward the kitchen while my father was back on the couch. I walked over to him and leaned my head on his shoulder. You okay, Pumpkin? He asked as he placed his hand back in mine. I am, Dad, I said to him. I pulled his hand up to my lips and placed a kiss on the back of his hand. I love you, I said to him. I love you too, sweetheart, he said. Uncle Keith heads to the kitchen. I think this is a good thing. All I need right now is to spend some quality time with my family. Yeah, that sounds nice, says Bex. I look back at her, and she smiles. Dad's scent is calming. I couldn't agree more. It was so good to be home. Chapter 12. Lena. The evening went so smoothly. We had a family night and even watched a film together. Logan and Sophia went to their house, while Uncle Keith took the spare room. It was nice to be with everyone. The next day was quiet, and I didn't leave the house. My father and uncle left me to sleep in, but I was greeted with a rose when I woke up and went downstairs. I love roses, they are my favorite. I was surprised to learn that the rose was from Elias. He even left a note, which only read, "I can't wait to see you." My stomach was in knots, thinking he was waiting to see me. But a part of me had a guard up. I know he's my mate, but I need to either learn to move forward or figure out what I want with everything he has done to me in the past. Bex stirs in my head as I get up from bed. Yesterday was a good day. My dad and uncle picked up some paint from the hardware store in town. I decided to paint my room and give it a brighter meaning to the word Lena. Something that felt like me, the color aqua. I love the color. We found a lighter shade and painted one wall in the color. I had my father place new shelving. My room looks more like me now than it did back in the day. I glanced around, knowing I was going to train today. I knew it was early. Bex was still asleep. I swing my legs over the edge of the bed and place them on the floor. I glanced up and noticed the box of diaries. I got them out last night and read some more of them. Most were hard to read, as memories of what happened those days were hard. I shook my head and sighed, "Get a grip," I muttered to myself. I get up and quickly get myself dressed in the bathroom. I remembered to place my training gear in the bathroom the night before. I quickly got myself dressed and walked out of my room. I walked down the stairs to be greeted by my father, uncle, Logan, and Sophia. They look up at me and smile. "Morning, sweetheart," says my dad as he walks up to me and places a kiss on my cheek. I smile. "Morning," I say to everyone. Logan moves and has a smirk on his face. "This was left for you from your lover boy," he says, as he hands me a rose. I take it off him and frown. "Stop calling Elias that," I say to him, which makes him laugh out loud. "You have to see the funny side of this, he never bought flowers for anyone ever. You are his first and also his last." I shrugged. I walked over to the table and sat next to Sophia, and she smiled at me. "I think having flowers is special," she said. I looked at my brother. "I think you should take the hint, brother," I said with a smirk. Logan stares at me. "I already have," he says as he walks past and slams his mouth on Sophia's. He kisses her hard and pulls away, leaving Sophia breathless. She looks at me and blushes. "I don't need to win my mate over," he said with a laugh. I sigh, but Logan puts a card down on the table in front of me. I stare at it. I know it's off Elias, but I don't want to look at it. "Aren't you going to look at it?" asks my father as he takes the chair next to me. I sigh and grab the card, quickly open it. The message reads, "Can't wait to see you in training today." I groaned. Great. I knew I shouldn't have read that. My stomach goes into knots, and the thought of Elias makes my heart beat slightly faster. Mate bond at its finest. "Well," says my brother, who still has a stupid smirk on his face. "I think we should leave," says my father. Everyone moves, and I follow suit. I couldn't eat a thing, not after reading that card. Bex stirs inside and looks through my eyes. "You okay? You seem like you want to throw up or something," she says, with concern in her voice. "Yep, just peachy," I said as I walked behind my father, Logan, and Sophia. We all leave the house, and Uncle Keith walks with me. "Mate left another rose and card," I said to her. Uncle Keith wasn't saying anything to me, he knew I was talking to Bex. Bex looks at me. That is what is making you feel ill? She asks. I looked back at her. I don't know what to think. I said to her, I need to see what happens, but I don't need to be forced into anything I don't want to do either. Bex looks back at me. I know, and I agree, she says and looks through my eyes. We were now closer to the training ground. I stop in my tracks as I looked around. There were many pack members here, and most of them were looking at me. Great, I muttered. They heard you were back, says Sophia, who stood next to me on the right, and Uncle Keith was on the other. They wanted to see for themselves. I groaned. Sophia placed her hand on my arm and squeezed. It will be okay, she said, and walked toward Logan. He was looking at me but was staring off into the distance. You okay? Asks Uncle Keith as he takes in the training ground. Yep, never better, I said, full of sarcasm. Uncle Keith looks at me. Remember, don't show your full hand, he says as he makes his way over to my father, standing with the older generation. I walked over to Logan and Sophia. Sophia smiles, but I hear a grunt. You can't train here, says a voice from behind me. I turned to look and noticed a girl, frowning at me. Bex looks through my eyes and starts to growl. We can take her, she says. I know that, but we have to show that we only know some techniques, even though we probably could kick everyone's ass here, I said to her. I ignored the bimbo and looked at my brother, who seemed to be smirking more again. What? I said to him. He shakes his head and looks behind me, but I don't look as his scent comes wafting towards me. Mate, says Bex excitedly. I groan. I stared at my brother, thinking of many ways to kill him and the bimbo. But suddenly, someone was standing so close behind me that I could feel his heat. His scent was overpowering, and all I wanted to do was turn around and jump into his arms. You know, you can look at me, princess, he says as he leans into me. I stared ahead. Not happening, Elias, I said through clenched teeth. I know he's still close, but before he could say anything, Bimbo Brain decided to speak up. Oh baby, come and help me work out, she says as she walks over to Elias, placing her hand on his arm. I stepped away and looked over my shoulder, and I looked straight at a hard set of AA*s. He looks good. I looked up into his eyes, and he stared down at me with a stupid smirk on his stupid face. Bex was purring, but we glanced at the stupid bimbo, and her hand moved over his chest into our view. Bex stops purring and snarls as we watch the bimbo. I glanced back at Elias, who was still staring at me, but I had enough. I think she needs more help than I do, I said and turned away. I walked away and headed to the front of the crowd. I could feel his stare at me. Logan moved away and went up front with me. You should work, he started to say, but I growled at him. I would stop if I were you, or I will seriously hurt you, I said to him as I turned to look at him. He was about to protest, but he stared at me. I'm not messing about. Time for training, shouts the trainer. I glanced back to watch the trainer stand in front. But I noticed someone was standing next to him, but when she came into view, I knew instantly who she was, and it had to be her. Great, another one of Elias's ladies. Bex was close and stared at the woman in front. That's the one, she said with a snarl. I need to train, I said back at her. Bex can feel my mood and knows I'm not in the mood for his st. The woman looks at me and glances behind me. The trainer was about to speak, but she leaned up to him and whispered in his ear. I wondered what she was saying to him, but suddenly I felt his eyes were on me. Oh great, what did she say now? The woman pulls back and looks at me with a smirk. Okay, we are going to do some sparring, he shouts. I will place you against your opponents. I stay where I am, and the trainer points to various people. He walks along and stands in front of me. You're Logan's baby sister I keep hearing so much about, he says. I glared at him. I thought you would have been taller, he says. Oh, I want to kill him. I was about to say something, but I noticed my uncle shaking his head at me. Oh, come on, I need to show this what I can do. I stare back at the trainer. I guess I can train you, or better yet, stand over there, and we can see what you can do later on, he says. He nods in the direction away from the training grounds. He pushes past me, and I look over my shoulder. Everyone was already partnered. I looked at Logan, who was fighting against the Gamma, and noticed that Sophia was facing the Bimbo. Bimbo didn't look too happy, and she looked directly at me. She frowns but suddenly smirks. She walked over to Elias, who was talking to the trainer. Bex was growling, I had enough of this. I need to do something. Bimbo was talking to Naomi while Elias was talking to the trainer. How about we train together, says a voice. I quickly turned around and noticed Alpha Frank standing by the side of me. I smiled. I don't think your trainer will like that, I said to him as I glanced back and realized that the four of them were now staring at Alpha Frank and me. He can't tell me what to do, I'm the Alpha, and not only that, he says as he moves closer to me. I know he was looking at the four people. Eli will think more quickly next time that girl is around. I looked up at him. I don't really care what he does, I said to him, lying. He smirks. I know you have feelings, your bond is strong with one another, he says. I think we should spar, he says. I nodded to him and turned to look at him. Okay, I said to him. The trainer comes over to Alpha Frank and me. Alpha, you don't have to train with her, I was going to ask her to help me, he says, but glares at me. Well, I want to spar with Lena as she needs some training, Alpha Frank says. Besides, do you want to face her Uncle Keith, one of the most qualified fighting masters in the world? The trainer's eyes go wide, and he glances back. I know Uncle Keith is behind, but I don't know what his face is like, but I have some idea. Very well, you may as well spar against a weak one, he said. Bex was pissed. He is on my hit list, she snarled. Well, one way to work up my wolf is to have a plastic Barbie doll to try to get my mate's attention. I glanced at the trainer, but he was in the center of the ground. Never mind him, says Alpha Frank, I know what you can do. I looked up at him, feeling slightly confused. Alpha Frank leans into me. I know you beat your uncle's score in the qualifiers in a spectacular time, and I'm well impressed, he says. My eyes went wide. I looked at him. Please don't tell anyone, I said. Alpha Frank looks at me and nods. I understand you want to keep your head down and not let Eli know either. But I have to admit, I am proud to say I am happy that we have an ultimate warrior as our Luna. No one will defeat us, he says. Luna, I said with a gulp. Frig, I forgot that Elias is Alpha now. Alpha Frank smiles but doesn't say anything. Now spar, shouts the trainer. I didn't even hear what he said. Alpha Frank and I face each other. I followed his moves, even though they were easy, and I had learned them all before. I knew I had to be careful as Alpha Frank was nothing like the competitors I faced before. The training ended after an hour, and I enjoyed it. The only downfall was I had to listen to the snide comments from the trainer, Naomi, and the stupid Bimbo. I needed to go. I needed to run. Have you ever tried to control a feral she-wolf who wanted to P3 people's heads off? Well, I can say it was hard work. Bex wanted to kill the trainer, especially with the comment "slut," which came from his mouth. Bimbo was sparring against Sophia, but the trainer switched with Elias halfway through, which the Bimbo loved as he got to have his arms around her. As for Elias, I didn't even bother looking at him. But I knew he was staring at me most of the time through training. Everyone was leaving, and I had to get out of there. I knew if I stayed, I would be asked loads of questions that I didn't want to answer. I turned to walk, but Sophia runs up to me. "Hey, Lena," she says. I looked at her and smiled. "Sophia, I will see you later." "I need to go for a run," I said before she could say anything. Bex has been on edge for the last hour, and I think a run will calm her down. "No, it will not," she yells in my head, "stupid mate." I look back at Sophia, her face softens. "I understand, Lena, I could tell you were trying to control her. I was going to suggest we go shopping, but we can go another time. I have never been shopping with a friend before." "I would love to, but we will have to do it another time," I said to her. "Can you tell my dad and my brother where I'm going?" Sophia smiles. "I will," she says. I turned and started to run away from the training grounds. I ran straight to the forest clearing. I needed to get away from everyone. As I get to the forest clearing, I walk into the forest. Bex was on edge, but I didn't shift. I know if I shifted into her, she would head back and kill the trainer and, most notably, the Bimbo. We must have walked for about half an hour. Bex was quiet, but she stirred. "You know we have been followed the whole time," she said. "Oh, I know, his scent has been wafting toward me. He must think I was born yesterday." "I know, I've been ignoring him," I said to her. "I have an idea. Do you want to have some fun?" Judging by the look she gave me, she was up for it and much more. "Mate wants to follow us, he won't know what hit him." Chapter 13. Eli, why were people out to torment me? I wanted to spend time with my mate, even train with her. But everyone had to interfere in the whole situation. My morning was going so well too. I woke up in a good mood. I knew I would see Lena in training and all I wanted to do was be with her. Logan mind linked me to let me know they were there, and I ran as fast as I could to the training grounds. But I wasn't expecting to be groped and harassed by Amber. Amber and I never hooked up, but we have flirted a few times. I have to admit that I would never go there as I know she has been with many men within this pack and wasn't bothered whether they had mates. I couldn't help but smirk when I could feel jealously roam over Lena. That was short-lived when Blaze told me that it was her wolf more than Lena. Then came Bruce and Naomi. I didn't know what their deal was, but they kept me away from Lena. Considering Naomi had known Lena had been my mate for a while, I thought she would have made sure I was close to her. But her face said otherwise. She wanted to make it clear that I had to work for Lena. I remember watching as Bruce told Lena to stand on the sidelines, making Blaze growl and want to take over. But I had Amber and Naomi making that part difficult again. I could feel Tim and Logan's gazes on me, knowing my best friend I would get it later on. I had no clue why everyone in the training ground was against me being with Lena. I know everyone doesn't know we are mates, and they will soon enough. All I want is to get Lena alone and explain my reasons for sending her away before announcing she was my mate. When Bruce told us we would be paired up to spar, I wanted to spar with Lena. Judging from Naomi's face, that would be impossible. I was to spar against her but was switched halfway through to train with Amber, who seemed to forget that we were training, not fumbling around in bed, as her hands roamed over my chest and even grabbed my A*s a few times. Blaze was on edge, and he wanted to pee her throat out for touching what was clearly not hers. He wanted to be near and train or even spar against Lena. But we were both left in shock at who wanted to spar with her. To Bruce's astonishment and even my surprise, I found my father walking over to Lena, offering to be her sparring partner. My father never bothers to train with us, only with the older generation, who usually trains in the evening. But judging from Keith's face, he was pissed at how Lena was treated here. I was too. I needed to tell everyone that she's my mate and soon. The training lasted an hour, and I couldn't keep my eyes off Lena. Her moves were flawless, and she made everything look easy. She could clearly hold her own, making Blaze puff out his chest with pride. I could sense she was holding back on her punches and techniques, but I didn't know why. Once the training was over, Naomi and Bruce wanted to talk, but I had no intention, and thank God for Logan. He came over and dealt with them, but my mate had other ideas. I watched as she ran off toward the forest. I followed her but kept my distance. I knew she needed space, but I needed to see her. I needed to hold and breathe in her scent. "Why aren't we catching up with our mate?" asks Blaze, pulling me from my thoughts. I sighed. "You can feel she wants to be alone, I'm trying to give her that, but I know we both need her too," I said to him. "For the last half hour, we have been following her. We have been making sure we are not close enough for her to sniff our scent." Lena was taking in what the forest offers, and in all fairness, so was I. I looked around but realized she was completely out of sight. I scan the forest, but her scent hits me hard out of nowhere. Suddenly, I'm pushed up against a tree with a raged mate staring up at me. I smirk, but she speaks. "Elias," she says as she holds me in place, "why are you following me?" I stare into her eyes as the fire inside her intensifies. I don't know if she's pissed at me or what happened to her at the training grounds. Blaze looks at her with a smirk. "Mate is feisty when she's pissed," he says as he licks his lips. Her scent wafts up my nose, which calms me, but it goes straight to me, making me semi-hard. "Well, I wanted to explain," I said to her. I can feel her whole weight on my body, but she leans back and looks at me. "Explain what?" she says as she takes a step back. "Explain why the blonde bimbo felt your A*s or why I was humiliated at the training grounds." I smirked. "Is my little mate jealous?" I said to her. She huffs. "Far from it, I couldn't give two flying monkeys." I smirk. "I don't believe her, she's jealous." Blaze scans over her and smirks. "You dumbass, her wolf is jealous, but human mate needs more convincing." I groan. I look at her, and she stares at me. After a few moments, she turned to walk away. That isn't happening. I use my speed, grab hold of her waist, and turn her around to face me. "Where do you think you are going?" I asked as I leaned into her neck, breathing in her scent. The tingles of the mate bond flow through me as I hold onto her waist tight. I can feel her tense under my touch. "I need to," she says, but stops. I keep my head in the crook of her neck as my lips skim over her skin. I want to kiss her, and I want to do more. "Elias, please," she whispered. I kiss her neck, and her breath hitches at the contact. I move toward her, ensuring there is no space between her back and my front. "Lena," I said in a raspy breath. Lena slowly moves around and looks up at me. Her eyes scan my face as she licks her lips. I couldn't help but lean toward her mouth. "Elias, she whispered as I moved closer. I want to kiss her. But suddenly, her leg connects to my balls, and pain floods over my entire body. And stumble back. I think she kicked them into my abdomen. I bend over as Blaze groans but is trying not to laugh his head off at what she has just done. Lena moves closer to me and bends down, her face inches away from my face. Elias, she said with slight amusement. I guess I should warn you next time a woman comes near you. Don't overthink, especially if you want to be mates with me, she says. She turns to walk away, and I glance up. Not happening, sweetheart, I thought. With the pain still in my groin, I used my speed and grabbed her, pinning her to the nearby tree. I make sure my leg spreads hers wider as I stand between them. I move her arms up above her head as she looks back at me with a stunned expression. I smirk. Oh, what fun I am going to have. Chapter 14. Eli. I move my face closer to hers. Now, that wasn't nice, mate, I said to her and leaned my head into her neck. I place fury kisses along her neck and move until I get to her mouth. I hovered over her lips as her breath hitched. Now I have your undivided attention, sweetheart, I said to her as I stared into her eyes. You will have to make it up to me, I said to her as I leaned into her. Making sure my body covers her. Making sure she can't run away or even hurt me. Her eyes widen as she stares at me, not saying a word. What, your wolf got your tongue? I said to her as I slammed my mouth on hers. I move my lips and lick the bottom of her lip to gain access, but she doesn't move. I kiss her mouth but use my teeth to bite down on her bottom lip. She gasps as I slide my tongue into her mouth. It feels like heaven as I move my tongue around her mouth. Tasting every inch I can find, she moans into my mouth, making me pull back and smirk. I moved slightly and stared down at her. I bite my bottom lip as I take in the sight of her. Her lips are swollen, especially when I bite her lip. Her breath quickens while her chest rises up and down heavily. Now, I say to her, but I am hit with her arousal before I can say the rest of my sentence. She is turned on, and her body betrays her. I growl as I lean into her. Calm down, mate, or I will take you right here and now, I say as I move into her neck. I need to stop this. I think you should move your hands from mine, Lena says as I move back to look at her. My eyes go wide as I look back down at her. She moves her head and places a kiss on my lips. My hand that is holding her arms together loosens slightly as she kisses me harder. I move my hand and put it on her waist, she wraps them around me. I kiss her back, I need her. Lena, I moaned with a low growl slipping past my lips. She doesn't stop. She moans out. Go on a date with me. I asked her in a raspy breath. I kissed her marked spot and moved up to her ear. Elias, she said with a slight pant. I moved to look at her, her chest rising up and down. I think that's a bad idea, she says as she looks up at me. I frown. What? Lena, please, I want to take you out. I want to explain everything to you, even get to know you more, I said to her. She looks at me and moves slightly, but my grip on her waist tightens. I need time, this shouldn't have happened, she says as she points between us. Why? We're mates, I said to her. Blaze was horny as hell, and I loved that we made her come, but now even he was slightly confused about her actions. Lena scans over my face and sighs. She unravels her legs from around me, placing them down. I have to admit, I am quite surprised to see your balls were back to normal, she says. I look at her, slightly confused, but something registers. She kicked me in the nuts earlier. I move back slightly. Look, what is your problem? I asked her. She frowns. I haven't got a problem, but you seem to have forgotten about the blonde B*H that touched you, Naomi getting close to you, and me feeling left out of the whole training, she says with a pointed look. I stared back at her. You were jealous. I started to say, but she shook her head at me. Don't confuse what you saw with jealously, she says. I was about to say something, but she beat me to it. I want to spar against you, she blurts out, which surprises me. I raised my eyebrows at her. What do you mean you want to spar against me? I asked her. She crosses her arms over her chest and looks at me. I will make you a deal if we spar against each other, say tomorrow. I will go on a date with you if you win, she says. I can't help but smile. But if I win, you leave me alone, she says. I was taken aback by what she said. Blaze frowns. That will never happen, he says. I looked back at him. You think she could beat us? I asked him. Blaze looks at me, but a slow smirk forms his wolf face. Nope. I sigh. Why would she want to spar with me then? I asked him. He ponders over the questions but shrugs. Maybe mate wants to show you what she can do, he says. Lena clears her throat, which brings me back to her. She moves her head to the side as she studies me. Well, will you spar with me tomorrow? She asks. I stared at her. Question, why? I asked her. She looks at me, but after a few moments, she sighs. I want to show you what I can do, but not only that, I want you to work for me. I'm not like most girls, and I was humiliated on the training grounds. Not everyone knows what I have been through and what I'm capable of, but if my mate can see what I can do, then maybe I can have a chance to prove to him I am what he needs, she says. She doesn't have to prove anything to me, I want her no matter what. You don't have to prove anything to me, I said, but she shook her. I do, you don't get it, she said. I look at her. There was determination in her face, something that made me think that there was more to this than just being my mate. I need to do this, Elias, she says as she steps closer to me, closing the gap between us. So if you win, I will go on a date with you, and if I win, you will leave me alone, she says. I frowned. I will agree, only if you win will you take some time to think about this whole mate thing between us. I won't agree to leave you alone, as Blaze will probably go and mark you without consent, but you could take a week to figure it out, I said to her. Blaze was growling in my head, not liking what I suggested. Lino looks up at me and studies me once again. I can't do that, Blaze says, I need to be with her. I know, that's why I suggested giving her a week without us as she can come to her senses and make her mind up about us, I said to him. There is no way she can stay away from us that long, she will be with us sooner. Blaze stares at me but sighs. Mate bond is stronger now, like it was back when we knew she was our mate, he says. I nod. I have to agree with him every time I breathe in her scent. It triggers everything inside me like before. But this time, I had no control over anything. I looked back at Lena, and she looked like she was talking to her wolf. But she glances at me. I agree with what you suggested, she says quickly. I nod. Lena looks up at me. I think we should spar tomorrow, she says. How about outside my house? I smirk and lean into her neck. I breathed in her scent once again, needing her scent to calm me down. I will agree, only if I win, we will go on that date tomorrow night, I said to her. Lena gulps. Okay, she says quietly. I kiss her neck. I move back a reasonable few steps. Lena watches me. I will leave you now, mate, I said to her as I turned to head back through the forest, to head back home. I will be at your house at 9 sharp, I shouted over my shoulder to walk away from her. I had to leave, I needed to go, or I would have had her moaning more. I headed through the forest, not looking back at her, and headed back to the pack house. I needed to be away from everyone, so I knew I needed to go to the office as no one bothers me when I'm there. I know I left my mate standing there watching me go. Blaze was quiet in my head, but all I could think was sparring with my mate tomorrow. I wanted to know why she thought she needed to prove that she could take me on and prove herself. I could see the pack house in the distance, and I knew I had the day in the office. But first, I needed to shower, a cold one. Chapter 15. Lena. I watched as Eli walked away from me. Bex was panting hard in my head after he made me come in my pants. I was shocked at how good he was. I have to admit, my insides were having a field day when his hands were on me. I knew this was going to be complicated. I know what I suggested to him would make him question everything, but I needed to do it. I needed to prove myself, and after everything that happened on the training grounds, I needed it more than ever. I needed him to know what I was capable of, that's why I suggested that he could take me on a date if he won. I knew it would get his attention, as he would never have turned down a challenge. But I also knew it would never have happened if it was in front of other people, so I suggested my place. If we had done it on the training grounds, everyone would have changed their plans, and knowing the people who had caused the whole situation in the first place, I needed it to be a fair sparring fight. I knew the trainer had it in for me when Naomi whispered whatever it was to him. And not forgetting what that blonde bimbo was doing. I didn't know if he enjoyed it, but I knew I needed to find out for myself. He didn't enjoy it, says Bex, as Elias was now out of our sight. He wanted to get close to us, I could sense his wolf. I didn't say anything to her. She looks at me and sighs. I know why you are truly doing this, she says. It's because of what happened when you were in school, with all those girls that tormented you and caused harm, she says. I couldn't help but growl, which stopped her from talking. Her eyes went wide. Did you just growl at me? She asked. I sighed and started to walk away. I needed to get home. Lena, everything is not meant to be a challenge, not with mate, she says as she looks through my eyes. I didn't say anything to her as I made my way back home. I could feel Bex's eyes on me, but I stopped before I got to the clearing of my house. Bex, I need to do this. It's not just because of what happened all those years ago, something Alpha Frank said to me. I am to be Elias's Luna, and I need him to believe I'm strong and worthy of being his Luna, mainly to show him I'm not the little girl he sent away, I said to her. Bex looks at me. I know, and I will help you in everything, including this sparring fight with mate tomorrow, she says. I look at her. I need to do it, like when I had my first human fight, I tell her. She nods but doesn't say anything to me. I walked towards the house and headed inside. As I walked into the house, I heard some murmurs coming from the kitchen. I quietly closed the door, not letting anyone know I was home. But I listened in on the conversation. It was between Logan, Sophia, Uncle Keith, and my father. I can't believe the nerve of that BH, says Sophia. She had her hands all over Eli. I hear a growl. That bastard needed to act like an alpha and put her in her place. He should have told her that Lena was his mate. Why didn't he? Asks my father. Dad, Eli wants to make sure Lena accepts him first. He has a long way to go with her. He hurt her feelings all those years ago, Logan says. I could hear someone scraping a chair along the floor. I know it was my fault that he sent her away. What? I listened in more. What was Logan talking about? What do you mean? Asked Uncle Keith. Logan was quiet for a moment, but he sighed. I found her diary, the pink one, under her bed. I read through it, and I read that she had feelings for him. I didn't know at the time she was his mate, and I wanted to embarrass her, he says. Well, I went to Eli and showed him the diary, making Blaze act weirder. Eli told me that Lena was his mate, and he was having trouble controlling Blaze. I couldn't think of a way to help my friend, but he told me he had a plan. I never thought he would have Naomi there to help him with the whole thing. I stared at the door. He planned the whole setup. Naomi knew about me, what? Lena, calm down, says Bex, but I knew she was pissed at what she had heard. He might have had issues with Blaze, but why did Naomi? I didn't finish what I thought as Bex growled loudly in my head. I stared back at her with wide eyes. Enough, she yells. Your overthinking is driving me nuts. I don't want to know anything, and I know that the girl has an issue with us, but I need a breather, she says. With that, she places a block up on me. I sigh, that's one of 3 times that Bex has ever done that to me. I overthink every possible angle and every scenario, especially when it came to Elias. I stop listening to the conversation and walk up the stairs. I closed the door behind me once I entered my room. I walked over to my bed and sat down, but not too long after sitting down. My door flies open to Logan barging in. You want to spar with Eli tomorrow? He shouts. Why? I stared up at him and growled. You need to back off, I snarled at him and pushed him up off the bed. Logan stares at me as I stand up in front of him. Look, what happened at the training grounds was a mess, but that doesn't mean you need to take it out on him, Logan says. I scanned his face. Elias must have told him. You need to get out of my room, I said through clenched teeth. Lena, we just want, says my father as he walked into my room. But he stops as he looks at me. He looks at me, and I bet he can feel the block that Bex has put up. I glared at them both. You both seem to forget that I never knew Elias was my mate. He knew about me for 6 years. I had only found out for 2 days, I said. I glanced between them and kept my eyes focused on Logan. As for the training grounds, neither of you helped me, no one did, except Alpha Frank. I was left to defend myself on my own, and not only that, I had to be a good little she-wolf because my mate is too ashamed to tell everyone who his mate is. Logan flinched. He stares at me. Lena, he starts to say, but I growl at him. I don't want to hear anything from you, I tell him. I walked straight up to him and stopped right in front of him. You have no idea what I have been through, I said to him. His eyes searched my face, but I never let my emotions get the better of me. Why don't you go and tell Elias everything? You're good at that. Logan's eyes went wide. I smirked. I heard everything, and to be fair, brother, I knew you would have told him. But you never found my true diaries because if you did, we would have a whole different topic, I said to him. Logan looks at me confused, but I step back. How about you get out of my room? I said to him. Logan stares at me, but someone clears their throat. I think we should let Lena to her thoughts, says Uncle Keith. I don't look at him as I keep my eyes on Logan. Logan looked at me for a few moments, but he sighed. Without saying a word, Logan and my father left my room. Uncle Keith watches me as I watch my sibling and father go. My eyes moved to my uncle. You think it was easy for me to watch all that on the training field? He asks as he steps inside. I wanted to kill that trainer and those 2 girls for you, but I have to admit I'm proud of you for not killing them. Plus, you held Bex back like a pro. I didn't say anything to him. I stared at him. Lena, I'm the only one that knows why you want to spar with Eli, and I think it's a good idea, he says. He leans back on the door frame. I think talking about it might help, but it has to be with someone you can trust, he says. That's hard, I don't trust many people. My uncle searched my face, but his eyes looked at the box in the corner. You need to show someone those. I know I don't know half, but you can't keep it all bottled up. It will destroy you and maybe everything with Eli too, he says. Uncle Keith stares at me, but he pushes off the doorframe and sighs. He turns around and walks to the door. I needed to say something. I don't know who I can trust, I said quietly. Uncle Keith stops by the door and looks over his shoulder at me. I can think of one, he says. He turns around, but he continues to talk. I know you have never trusted many women before, but Sophia seems to have taken an interest in you and has even stood up for you. She nearly killed Logan when he mentioned reading your diary. I stared at him. Did she do that? Yeah, she did, says Uncle Keith, making me look at him. You should have stayed longer instead of arguing with Bex. I sighed. I need to think, I said to him. Uncle Keith nods and turns to walk out. But before he does, he looks at me once more before saying, don't overthink, but you have gained a sister with Sophia and someone who knows what it is like to be alone, not like you, but she knows what it feels like. I give him a small smile, and he smiles back. He turns to leave and heads down the stairs. I walked over and closed the door. I looked around my room, but I could feel the block coming down from Bex. Bex stares at me. I heard everything, and I think Keith is right, she says. We should talk to Sophia, she might be able to help you with the thoughts you have. I stare back at her. I know both Bex and Uncle Keith are right. I never had anyone to talk to, especially a woman. I found it hard as everyone who tried to be friends with me wanted to get close to my brother and Elias. I did have friends in my uncle's pack, but I never got close to them to tell them my secrets. They only stayed close to me due to the fighting and my uncle. I walked over to my bed and sat down. There was a knock at the door, and I glanced at the door as the door opened. Once the door opened, there stood Sophia. She smiles at me. It's just you and me, she says. We have the house to ourselves as the boys left for the pack house. I smiled. You can come in, I said. Sophia walks in and closes the door behind her. I might as well start opening up with someone, I just hope she's ready to hear it all. Chapter 16. Lena. Sophia took a seat on the bed next to me. She smiles at me. You know you can talk to me, Lena, she says. I stared at her. I had to start opening up to someone. Bex, I said to her. Stay close and let me know what you think. Bex looks at me and nods. I looked at Sophia, pushed myself off the bed, and walked over to the chair. I removed all the clothes I had placed there while sorting out the closet the other day. I placed the clothes on the floor next to the chair and looked back at the bed, where Sophia was staring at me. I don't know where to begin, I said to her. Sophia smiles and looks toward the box of diaries. I was shocked to learn that Logan read one of your diaries. I know it was an invasion of privacy, but you told me no one had read them. No one has, I said to her, making her look back at me with a confused look. I sighed. I know what diary Logan read, I said to her. I knew he and my dad would snoop if they were worried about me, especially when Elias started to act weird. One evening, I found an old diary I had as a child. I remember thinking that I needed a good hiding spot for my diaries, and I found one. But I knew my dad and Logan would turn my bedroom upside down looking for something that I would write in. I leaned back in the chair as Sophia got comfier on the bed. I started to write in a pink diary, the one he was downstairs. I thought I would put certain things in that I wanted them to know, so I started writing a few short versions of what went on, well, little lies. I knew one or both of them would read the book. I never wanted them to read what truly went on, I said to her. So you lied about your feelings about Eli, she asked. No, I did put some truth in there, but not a lot, I said. I looked at her. The diaries you caught me reading are my true ones. Can I give you one to read? I asked her. She nods as I get up from the chair and walked over to the box. I quickly grabbed the first diary that I could get my hands on. The diaries are dated at the top, but most of them are the same, I said as I got up and walked over to her. I handed her the book and glanced at the bathroom. Look, why don't you read some while I have a shower, I said. Sophia looks at me and nods. Sophia opens the diary and starts to read. I needed to change, especially after my encounter with Elias. I walked into the closet and grabbed some fresh clothes. I walked into the bathroom and placed my clothes on the side. I closed the door behind me. I knew Sophia would be reading something horrible as I knew the diary I handed her was the last one I was reading, which was more graphic. My daily day at school, the bullies, and even some names she will know. I switched on the shower and stripped out of my clothes. I glanced down and looked at my panties, they had my cum all inside them. The image of Elias having me up against the tree came flooding my brain like a tidal wave. I still can't believe he got me off by touching my core and rubbing it through the material. You liked what he did? Asked Bex as she looked at me. I did, but that doesn't change how I feel at the moment, I said to her. Bex looks at me. I know, and I know you will let him win as the mate bond will work wonders during the sparring tomorrow, she says. I smirk. Thinking about his hands on me sends shivers up and down my spine. I think we should show him half of what we can do and let him win, she says. I climbed into the shower and stood under the water. I start to wash. Bex looks at me and smirks. You're planning on letting him win, she says. I might want to see what he does first, but I need him to realize that we are not a pushover, I say. She nods and glances out through my eyes. What do you think Sophia will think about the diary? She asks as she looks back at me. I sighed. I think we will find out soon, I said to her as I carried on washing. After 15 minutes in the shower, I climbed out and started to dry. Once I had dried, I put on all my clothes and looked at my reflection in the mirror. Bex, stay close, I said to her. She nods. I placed my hand on the doorknob and closed my eyes. I have never let anyone read my actual diaries before, not even Uncle Keith. I opened my eyes, letting go of my breath, and pulled the door open. I walked through and couldn't help but glance at Sophia. Her eyes were pricking with tears, and she looked up at me as a tear slid down her face. I'm so sorry, Lena, she says. I can't believe you went through so much. I looked at her and then at the diary. She was halfway through it already. I know there was much more in there that she hadn't read, but what she must have read must have made her realize something. There is more, I said to her quietly. I know, but something tells me they are all similar and worse than what I have read, she says. I gave her a little smile. I walked over to the chair and sat back down. Sophia looks back at the diary, but she closes it. She closes her eyes but opens them and looks back at me. Why didn't you tell your father what was going on? She asks. I sigh. I would have, but he was overbearing as it was. He let Logan do whatever he wanted without consequences, but I had to be watched whenever he was around, I said as I leaned back in the chair. My father never noticed anything, as Bex helped me cover up my emotions by being close by. She watched everything unfold but couldn't help as many people didn't know she was there. Sophia furrowed her eyebrows. How did she do that? She asked. Bex can hide our scent from people when we want, but that only happened when we were younger, as she came when I was 9, I told her. Her eyes went wide. You had Bex when you were 9, Logan never said, she said as she pulled her legs up onto the bed and crossed them. Logan doesn't know, I said. The only one that knew was my father. I shifted earlier as I was the one who was there when the rogue attacked and killed my mother. I shifted in front of them just as my father came home to save me. Bex wouldn't let me shift back, as she wanted to protect our mum, even though she was dead. Sophia's eyes were softened. Lena, I'm so sorry, she said. I shook my head. It's okay, and I wasn't alone. My father kept my secret safe, and he never told Uncle Keith. Well, not until he came for his visit. He never trusted anyone around here with that secret. Sophia nodded. I guess everyone here makes assumptions about everyone before they know the person, she said. Ain't that the truth? No one ever got to know me, they only wanted to know Logan or Elias. I looked at her. That's so true. No one got to know me, they only wanted to get close to Logan and Elias. No one thought about my feelings, I said. Sophia gave me a sympathetic look. I read about Naomi. What she and her friends did to you was disgusting. Why didn't you tell Eli? She asked. He would never have done the things he said or done. I looked at her. Elias knew what he wanted to know, and he would never have believed me. He was in love with Naomi, they were in a relationship with one another even up until he found out about me being his mate, I said. She looked at me, her eyebrows raised. He never told me that, he said he kissed her in front of you and never did anything else with her. I can't believe the lying piece of st. Well, he lied. He doesn't know that the evening he told me I was a stupid young brat he would never fall for, I said. I watch as Sophia's face changes slightly. I guess he told them a different version of what he told me. I was told to leave, I packed up my things and was already in my uncle's car. But I forgot 2 things. I thought I had packed them, but they were not in my bag. I told my uncle to leave the car by the pack house, and I would go back on foot to get what I had forgotten. He was reluctant, but he agreed. I walked back into my house, everyone was having drinks and fun. I walked back to my room and found the stuff on my bed, not where I left them, but something told me that I needed to go. I headed back downstairs only to hear moaning in the study. The door was ajar, and there in all their n*ked glory was Elias and Naomi having X on the couch. Sophia's eyes widened, but I carried on. I didn't stay as long as you could imagine, as Elias always did things like that. Bring women over, FK them, and I would have to be nice to them as they left the next day. But as I was about to leave, Naomi asked him if he loved her, and he said yes. Naomi knew I was there, as she was asking him, she was looking straight at me. Shouts Sophia. I raised my eyebrows at her, but she looked at me. Sorry, I have heard Eli talk about a few things, and most of the information I got was from Logan, she says. I nodded. I guess Elias never told my brother half, I said. Sophia nods and looks at me. I have to ask, why did you hold back in training? She asks. I looked at her confused. What do you mean? Sophia looks at me for a moment but pulls out her phone. She goes through it, and once she finds what she was looking for. Sophia gets up off the bed and walks over to me. This is you, right? She asks as she hands me the phone. As soon as she begins the video, I instantly know what she has in front of me. I looked up at her and stared. Where did you get that from? I asked her. Sophia smiled. A friend from your uncle's pack, Dylan. He came here with your uncle and wanted to show me it. I didn't know what to make of it as Logan never told me that you were an ultimate fighter, she says, but I cut her off. He doesn't know, not even my dad, I tell her. No one in the pack does, well except Alpha Frank, who mentioned it when we were training. Sophia looks at me. Why haven't you told anyone? She asks as she crosses her legs and sits on the floor next to me. I look at her and sigh. Over the last 6 years, I had to put up with people bullying me, treating me like St. I had enough when I got to my uncle's. I wanted to change and learn how to fight. My uncle is one of the elite fighters, and he trained me. I trained every day, I told her. I held back as my uncle wanted me to. I shouldn't show my hand unless needed. Sophia nods. That's fair, she says, but a smirk forms on her lips. What about Eli tomorrow? She asks. Are you going to take it easy on him? I looked at her with a smile. I might, I don't know. But if I let him win, I have to go on a date with him, I said. I told her about the whole forest incident, including him getting me off. Sophia smirks. I guess that's what I could smell when I came in, she says, but I couldn't help but blush. I don't know what I want to do yet, I think I will see what comes out of his mouth first before I begin. Sophia laughed. That's fair, Logan told me why you punched him, and in all fairness, I would have done the same if Logan told me that, she said, which I couldn't help but laugh. Sophia looked at me but glanced back at the diaries. Are they all like the one I read? She asked as she looked back at me. I nodded. Yeah, some are okay with some tales of Logan, but others are a lot worse, I said to her. She stays quiet for a moment, but I watch her. She's talking to her wolf, says Bex as she stares at her through my eyes. After a short few minutes, Sophia shakes her head and looks back at me. Sorry about that, my wolf Carly wanted to talk, she says. I smiled at her. There was silence in the room. You are the first person I have ever let read my diaries, I said to her out loud. Sophia looks at me. I'm honored, Lena, she says. She stared at me for a few moments. If it's okay with you, I might stay here tonight. Logan is with Eli for this evening, but I wonder if you fancy having a sleepover with me, she asks. I nodded. I never had one. Well, I have, but the girls were always in Elias or Logan's room, I said. Sophia growled, and I couldn't help but raise my eyebrows at her. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that with you, she says. I know your brother was a player back in the day, but it still hurts to know about it, especially when there are constant reminders everywhere you turn. I looked at her. I know what you mean, I told her. Elias was the same but worse. I think I know everyone he has been with, well till I moved away, that is. Sophia looked at me with sorrow. I think you need to tell him or even show him the diaries. I stared back at her. That won't be happening anytime soon, I told her. She looks at me but nods. I understand. But can I ask one question? She asks. And I nodded. Can we read some of those diaries tonight? Or should we have a girly night? I looked at her. I have obviously read them, but you can, but I would like to watch a film first, I said, before you read any more. Sophia nods. The rest of the night was fantastic. We talked more about the Ultimate Fighter and the diaries. But we also got to know more about one another. It was nice to have someone to open up with. Sophia, maybe my brother's mate, but she is now my sister. I will never admit to my uncle that he was right to his face, but he was right. I needed a friend, and I got that in Sophia. She is my friend and family. After a few long hours and around 11, we fell asleep in my room. Logan and my father never came back, which was weird. I knew something was up, but I didn't know what. Chapter 17. Eli. I was in my office for most of the evening since leaving Lena. The cold shower helped me calm down, but I needed to be near Lena again. I mind-linked Logan to tell him what happened. I was pulled from my thoughts when a knock came on my door, and my father walked in. I looked up as he made his way to the chair in front of my desk. How did it go with Lena? The training was something. What was Bruce and that blonde woman's problem? He asked. I sighed and leaned back in the chair. It went okay, but she wants me to spar with her tomorrow at her place. My father stared at me for a moment, but I carried on talking. She wants to show me what she's capable of. I sighed, and as for Bruce and Amber, I have no clue what their problem was, I said to him. Well, the way they treated Lena was disrespectful. You should have told them that she's your mate, he says. I don't say anything. I know he's right. I'm shocked that Lena acted like she did and did not go into great detail about me not announcing her as my mate. As for the sparring, I think it's a good idea, he says, pulling me from my thoughts. I looked at him with raised eyebrows. You agree you have never let anyone challenge you like that, not even a woman or mate? My father smirks. The thing is, son, I trained with her, and I have to admit I know she was holding back with me as she didn't want to challenge me, he says. As for you, you hurt her. It's only fitting if you agree and accept the challenge. You may even learn a thing or two from her. I groan. I looked back at my father in disbelief, but a mind link opened up, and it was from one of the patrol guards. Alpha, there have been sightings of rogues on the outskirts of the territory on the south side, he says. I'll be there, but check the perimeter and if you spot them, kill them, I said. I shut the mind link down and stared at my father. Rogues have been spotted on the outskirts of the south side of the territory again, I said to him. The guards are doing a perimeter check, but I have told the guards to kill them on sight. My father nods and gets up out of his chair. Wait, I will go, I said to him as I moved out of my chair. You will stay here, ask Tim to come and join you. I will have Logan come with me. My father nods, and mind links Tim to come to the office. I opened a mind link to Logan. Hey dude, there are rogues close to the south side of the territory. We need to check it out, meet me in the clearing of the forest. Okay man, he says and sighs. Sophia is having a night in with Lena, they are getting to know each other. I somehow feel slightly jealous that Sophia will know more about my mate than I. Blaze comes forward and stares out as I move to the office door. I waved at my father as I opened the office door and headed to the forest clearing, where I saw Logan leaning against a tree. You okay there, human? Asks Balls suddenly as we move closer to Logan. Yeah, I just want to be with Lena, I said to him with a sigh. Blaze looks at me, same here, but we get to see her tomorrow. We will have her in our arms again, he says with a mischievous grin. I looked back at him. You realize that Lena will be fighting us, right? I said. Blaze laughs slightly. Oh, I know, and I can still feel our balls have only now come down into place after that kick earlier, he says, smirking. I groan. You okay, dude? Asks Logan as he looks me over. I looked at him. Blaze grins, knowing I didn't tell Logan the whole story about Lena and me in the forest earlier. He witnessed me getting punched. I won't live it down if he finds out she need me in the nuts too. I'm fine, I said to him through gritted teeth. Logan stares at me for a moment but sighs. We walked into the forest and looked for the usual sighting of rogues. Over the last 3 years, rogues have been coming onto our territory and even killed a few members the last time they were here. There have only been a few sightings, like 3 or 8 at a time. There is no significant number of them to cause a war, but it is startling to know that we had many. I have reached out to neighboring packs to find out if they have had something similar happening in their territories. Most of the alphas haven't even noticed, but 2 have. Alpha Trevor and Alpha Dean, their packs are on either side of my pack. They have told me that the rogues have been coming into the human town to stay, but they leave. They didn't start having any trouble till 5 days ago. Alpha Dean mentioned that Alpha Trevor and I should visit him in his pack or meet somewhere with our beta to defuse the situation. I agreed, but Alpha Trevor didn't have any of it. He recently stopped taking our calls. Penny for your thoughts, says Logan, walking alongside me. I glanced over at him and sighed. What did Lena say to you about sparring tomorrow? I asked him. Logan groans. She told me nothing, and she wanted to do it an end of, he says, and looks at me. He stops and stares. I stopped and looked at him. What? I asked him. Logan frowned. I don't know what happened at the training grounds, but you either announce that Lena is your mate soon, or you won't be able to win her over. I stared back at my friend. You know I will, but I want her to accept me first, I said. You sound like a whiny girl, says Blaze in a huff in my head. I ignore him. How can she accept you if you don't put people in their place? That goes for Naomi and that blonde slut, Logan says. I sighed. I fk'd up on that one, I know. But I want Lena to be with me, but how will she accept me if she doesn't let me go near her? Logan looks at me and sighs. I don't know, dude, he says. We start walking and head to the end of the forest territory, where 2 of our guards are walking toward us. Alpha, one says. We followed their scent and found that they were in a camp close to the human town. I nod. What did you do? Asks Logan as he looks between them. I sniff the air, and the smell of blood hits my nose. Blaze growls out, rogue's blood. Did you kill them? I asked them before they could answer Logan's question. We did, there were only 2 of them, one says, but more scents were wafting nearer to the camp. They seemed to be coming from the human town. I glanced behind them, and there was no one in sight. I want more than 2 guards patrolling tonight, I said to them. They nodded their heads. Beta Logan and I will take the first shift here, and both of you do another perimeter check, I said to them. The ones that are due to come on patrol can stay with us but put more men on guard on the other sections of the territory. Both men nod and leave, taking the same route. I notice them walking toward us earlier. They will recheck the campsite, says Logan as I look over at him. I guess we should have pre-spar training to prepare you to take on my sister in the morning. I groan, which makes Logan laugh. I can feel Blaze smirk in my head. God, this is going to be a long night. Chapter 18. Eli, I thought it was a long, painful night, and it was. Logan and I patrolled the territory, searching for more rogues, but nothing came. We both went back to the pack house to sleep after 6 hours of doing nothing besides sparring against each other, which ended with us playing, fighting, and not doing anything serious. Sophia was spending some time with Lena, as she wanted to get to know her. But I couldn't help but feel envious of Sophia for spending time with Lena. When we were back in the pack house, we both crashed on the couches in the games room. We were exhausted. Our fathers left that night to look around the other side of the territory. I knew we had to come up with something about the rogues, but it was all new, and something was telling me it wasn't going to be the end of it. I was asleep on the couch when some freezing water landed on my face. I shot up out off the couch and stared at the prick that had done it. "Logan! You're awake," he says with a smirk. I glared at him. "What, dude?" I growled. Blaze laughs. "At least you don't smell anymore," he says, rolling around in my head. "Wolf! Stop looking like you want to pee me apart," says Logan. "You have to be ready, remember, you're sparring with Lena outside our house today." The mention of Lena had my insides turning into knots, and in a good way. I needed to be with her so badly. I didn't say anything to Logan, smiling like a Cheshire cat on speed. I walked to my room and quickly got dressed. I changed into some sports shorts and a t-shirt. Heading downstairs, I walked into the kitchen. I quickly grabbed some fruit, only turning around and walking into Naomi. "Watch where you are going, big guy," she says as she looks up at me. I groan. She needs to FK off. "I have to go," I said to her as I sidestepped around her. "Where are you off to in a hurry?" she asks. "You trying to make it up to that little mate of yours?" I stopped dead in my tracks and looked over my shoulder at her. Naomi knows about Lena being my mate, but I told her not to tell anyone as I wanted to make sure she accepted me. "You haven't told anyone about Lena and me?" I asked her. She looks at me with a thoughtful look. "Nope, that's your job to announce your mate." I stared at her for a few moments, but I quickly turned and walked away from her. I headed straight out of the front door and straight to Lena's house. Logan had already left as he wanted to be there when Sophia woke up. Judging from the cold shower I had this morning, he wanted to make sure I was awake and ready. As I walk closer to the house, I spot Tim with Keith standing next to Sophia. I smile at them as they all look up at me. There was a noise coming from the garage like someone was hitting something. I glanced over, and Lena was hitting the punch bag once again. I couldn't help but let my eyes scan over her body. She was in those lycra leggings and sports bra again. She suddenly stops and looks over at me. She doesn't say anything but nods to me. That was awkward. "I haven't missed it," calls my father from behind me. I looked over my shoulder and saw him walking toward Tim. Both men shake hands and start to talk. But my father catches my eye. "I wasn't going to miss Lena, and you spar against each other," he says with slight amusement in his voice. "Weird." Blaze looked through my eyes, but I could hear a low growl. "What's wrong?" I asked him. I scanned over the forest clearing, but there was no one there. I sniffed the air, but the only scent I could catch was my mate, who was walking up to me. "You ready?" she asks as she comes to the side of me. I look down at her. She looks stunning. "Yeah," I said to her, but I leaned closer to her, ensuring no one could hear me. "I can't wait to get my hands on you again," I said to her. Her breath hitches in her throat, and she looks up at me. "It wouldn't be the kind of place you would like," she says as she walks away from me. I smirk. Oh, I plan on touching some parts today, and when I win this sparring, I am going to have her melting in the palm of my hand. Everyone forms a circle, even though there are not many people here. They all want to make sure we still stick to the rules, clean fighting, and no bleeding. In other words, we need to throw each other over and pin each other down to get the point. Keith walks to Lena as I walk straight up to her. I stood in front of her, her short frame was clearly visible, as I could see straight over her head. But she wasn't giving anything away. Keith clears his throat. Now I will be referee, and there are 3 rounds, he says. He looks at Lena, clean fighting. I stared at them as there was a look on their faces that I couldn't read. What do you think that is about? I asked Blaze. Blaze looks through my eyes, but he shrugs. Maybe Uncle is making sure she doesn't kick you in your nuts again, he says with a smirk. I groan inwardly while he drops down and laughs his head off. You're not going to let me live that down, are you? I asked him. Before he could do anything, my mate decided to jump on me and start to use her arms. I quickly guarded myself. I placed my arms up on either side as she punched me. But I use my speed, grab her hands, and pull her to my chest. Enough of that, I say in a hushed tone to her ear. Lena wriggles about and even manages to get free from my grasp. As she does without a thought, she twists her body and spins her leg out, which catches me in the chest. I stumbled back and landed on my ass. Lena wins, shouts Keith as she steps to the side. She smirks as I look up at her. I groan. Blaze was laughing in my head. She just put you on your ass, he says in between his laughing. FK off, I muttered to him as I quickly got up. Logan smirks and shouts, concentrate man, she will have you again. I grunt. I needed to up my game before Keith could say go. I quickly charged and picked up my mate off the ground and slammed her to the floor. Lena grunts as I hold her arms above her head and pin her legs between mine. She tried to move, but I used my strength to control her. But I have to admit, she was strong. Blaze looked at her, and he moved his head to the side. She's holding back, he says. I looked at her and leaned into her neck, close enough to her ear. Come on, little mate, I said as I placed a kiss on her neck. I love this position, shame I can't spread your legs wider. Lena blushes, and her body responds to me, and I look up at Keith, who was smirking. He runs over and taps the floor. 1, 2, and 3. Eli wins, he shouts. I looked down at her, but her face was unreadable. I move slowly, but as I do, Lena's knee comes hurtling up right into my balls, and she kicks me off her. I groaned out as my balls had somehow gone up more than the first time she did it. I couldn't help but lean on the ground, waiting for my balls to descend. That's the second time she's done that now. Chapter 19. Lena. I stared at my mate, who was grunting out in pain. I knew he would play some game, but to get me turned on, especially in front of my family, that was a low blow even for him. I glanced over at Logan, who was laughing his ass off, but when he looked at me, he smiled. Come on Lena, he shouted. I couldn't help but smile. Bex was watching the whole thing and was even egging him on when he wanted to widen my legs. Well, you need a good seeing too, she says in my head with a stupid smirk on her face. I groan. I walk over to Elias, but he moves away and stands up as I get nearer. I could tell he was still in pain. I just kicked him full force in his crown jewels. I moved my head to the side as he stared at me, something was in his eyes. Mate, not happy, Bex says. I smirked. Well, I want to show him what I can do, I said to her. But she stared at me, but I was caught off guard by what she said next. Let him win. I stared back at her. You can't be serious, I said to her. She blinks at me and quickly nods her head. You know fully well that you want to go on that date with him. There are other times we can show him what we can truly do, but I don't want to hurt him anymore. I want to get to know him, she says. I looked back at Elias, staring at me, and he smirked. I noticed he moved slightly closer to me. I went to kick him, but he caught my leg. I looked at him, I knew I could do a spinning kick, but Elias pushed forward and made me land hard on the ground, once again. I grunt out due to the pain. Elias places his leg on either side as he pushes my leg further up till it reaches my head. I hadn't made this move since I was in gymnastics when I was 7 years old. He pins me down, and I can hear Uncle Keith counting for him to pin me. I was about to move, as there was a way I could get out of it. Bex looked back at me, shaking her head. Please, Lena, I want to know, mate. I stare back at my wolf. She has never asked me to do anything for her before. But I know she wants to get to know Elias, I have to admit, so I want to as well, but I know he will FK it up. Keith shouts out, pulling me from my thoughts, Eli wins again. Elias moves closer to my ear, making sure no one can hear him. Be ready for 7 p.m, I'm taking you out on our date, he says, and places a kiss under my ear. He moves quickly, and lets go of my leg. I got up off the floor and looked at everyone, and everyone was shaking his hand. Uncle Keith stood next to me. You let him win, didn't you? He asked me. I didn't say or even look at him. You knew how to get out of that move as the trainer taught you how, he says. I glance over at him, and he smirks. I shrugged. Well, we won't know, won't we? I said to him. He smirks, but he glances back at my father and Logan. You know it won't be long before everyone realizes what you can do, he says. I knew that would come up, especially since Sophia showed me the video. If she could find it, then anyone could. I know, but I want to tell them myself, I said to him. Uncle Keith nods. I had best go and talk to your father, he might have some questions, he says. I glanced around, I could feel eyes on me, and I knew it was Elias. You know, you keep kicking me in the nuts like that, I won't be able to give you any pups, he says as he walks up to me. I smirked. Well, stop talking out of your ass, and maybe you will find out what I truly like. He looks at me and smiles. You know, we could go, he starts to say, but his face goes blank. He was getting a mind link through. All the men are blank, and without saying a word, everyone runs off into the forest. What? They had just left me on my own, but I noticed Uncle Keith was with me. He stares at me. Rogues, he says as he walks up to me. I looked around, I wanted to help. I was about to run, but Uncle Keith ran and grabbed my arm. Lena, you can't. Eli wants you to be safe, he says. I stared back at him in disbelief. You can't be serious, I said to him. Uncle Keith, we both know I can be more helpful to them. Why is he acting like this? Uncle Keith doesn't say anything, but something registers. Elias thinks he's protecting me, the little girl he sent away. Bex was on all fours, but I knew why as I could smell the rotten eggs. I looked over my shoulder, and there were 5 of them. Where did they come from? Where are the others? 5 wolves stare back at Uncle Keith and me, but they all shift back into human forms. They were all men, and they were covered in blood. "Well, what do we have here, boys?" one shouts. I glared at him. Uncle Keith stares at him and moves to the side of me. "Lena," he whispered. "Your father and brother are on their way, we have to wait." I look at him, he can't be serious. "I can take them. Look, they don't know who I am, and if I'm being honest, I am fed up with all this and treated like a child," I said. I looked at the man, who had a stupid smirk. He walks over to me and moves his head to the side. "MMM, he says as he sniffs in my scent. "She has had a workout, boys, we should give her another one." With that, the man grabs me, and I duck. I quickly move back and let Bex take over. We use the man as a springboard and shift into her form. We instantly take out two rogues. I can see the man staring at us with wide eyes. We are *p the two men apart, not giving them a chance to do anything. Bex turns around and growls loudly at the man. "Well, a white she-wolf," he says. "Bex and I are a white wolf. Some would say we are the moon goddess's creation, but we don't have any powers of hers. We are just a pure white wolf." Bex growls loudly and snarls at him. I noticed the other two men were trying to get to Uncle Keith, but he was doing all right for himself. The man started to charge. "Bex, let me take him," I said to her. Bex knows what I want to do, and I just hope I can do it. Bex crouched down, and I shifted back into my human form. The man was so shocked by what I did that he didn't see my leg hit him square in the chest. He flies back, but he gets his balance. I quickly got up and ran toward him. I jumped and wrapped my legs around his neck. He holds me onto my thighs, but I lean back, taking him over. I squeeze my thighs together, and Bex joins me. We use both of our strengths to place all our force into his neck until we snap it. I untangle myself from the man, whose lifeless body rolls with no effect whatsoever. I stood up. But Uncle Keith looks at me with a smile, but it goes as he stares behind me. I looked over behind me to find Sophia, Logan, and my father staring at me with wide eyes. Sophia was the only one smirking. Now I have to tell them everything. I looked around and noticed that Elias wasn't around. He must be sorting out something, but out of nowhere, my chest started to get tight. "Something is wrong." "What?" Bex howls out, but she can't speak. I stared back at her, and there were tears in her eyes. "Mate," she says. I didn't want to hear any more. I turned and ran into the forest. I knew I had to find him, and I needed to save him. Bex didn't say anything to me, but her tears ran down her face. I caught his scent, but I came to a screeching halt. The scene before me was not what I expected. I thought he was in danger. I was clearly wrong. There in front of me was Elias. He had his tongue deep inside Naomi's mouth. He must have caught my scent as he pulled away and stared at me with wide eyes. I didn't give him a chance. I turned and ran away. I knew it. I knew I shouldn't have given him a chance. No wonder Bex didn't tell me. He not only hurt me. He hurt my wolf too, which is a big no in my eyes. I ran as fast as possible. I didn't want to be here anymore. I could hear movement behind me. "Lena," he shouted. I could hear him shout my name, but I didn't turn around. I ran back to my home, where Logan and my dad looked at me. "Lena, what's wrong?" my dad called as I got to him. I tried to catch my breath, but I saw him out of the corner of my eye. He was staring at me. I could feel tears prick behind my eyes. "He hurt me. He hurt Bex." He moves closer, but it's the figure behind him that I stare back at her. she was smiling. Naomi smirks as she looks at me. She knew what she had done. Lena, he says as he comes closer to me. I had enough of this. I walked up to him, and before he said anything, I pulled my arm back and made sure my hand was in a fist, and I punched him square in the face. I hit harder than before. Elias grunts out and falls back slightly, and I turn around. But stop, I did a spinning kick on him which sent him flying towards Naomi, who was looking shocked. Elias lands with a thud right in front of her. He stares back at me with wide eyes. I walked over to him and stood a few feet away. I, Lena Anderson, reject Alpha Elias Morgan as my mate, I said. The pain in my chest hits me hard and tightens, but I keep my emotions in check, even though I can hear Bex howl out in pain. Elias's eyes go wide, and he clutches his chest. I don't care if he accepts the rejection or not, he needs to know he has FK'd with the wrong girl. I turned on my heel and walked away, with everyone gaping at me. Lena, why? Asks Logan as he looks at his friend. But I have had enough. If it weren't for him, I would still have been in my uncle's pack and loving life. I punched my brother square in his face, and he fell backwards. I didn't say anything. I walked straight into the house and slammed the door. There is no way I'm staying here, and I know I need to leave. I ran up to my bedroom and slammed the door behind me. I leaned on the door for support and let the tears fall down my face. I didn't want to show him how he made me feel, I never did before, so why start now? I slid down the door and pulled my knees to my chest. I hate him. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.